It's kind of an interesting story. In fact, Gilgamesh says, it's our first story about the gods. It's our oldest story about the gods. In fact, Gilgamesh says the story's so old it didn't even happen in Sumer. You'll remember I told you that, according to the story the Sumerians tell about themselves, that the Sumerians didn't always live in Sumer, but they used to live up in the mountains to the north of Sumer. Well, that's where Gilgamesh says the story takes place, up in the mountains to the north of Mesopotamia. One night, the gods are up in their spirit houses on top of the mountains trying to get to sleep. And like I said, Sumerian polytheism is pretty typical. If you ever find polytheism in a place where there are mountains around, then guess where the gods live? They live on top of the mountains. That's just pretty standard. Well, one night, the gods are up in their spirit houses on top of the mountains, and they're trying to get to sleep. But the people who live down the valley are having a big party, and they're making a lot of noise at their party and dancing and singing, and the gods can't get to sleep with all the noise the people are making down the valley. I used to live in that apartment complex, so I can identify with the gods here. And all night long they toss and turn on their spirit beds in their spirit houses, cussing out the people down in the valley. And finally, one of the gods hollers over and says, "Hey, you, the god who can make it rain anytime she wants to. Just snap your fingers 3 times or whatever, and make it rain and flood out that valley and kill all those people so we can get some sleep around here." And the god who can make it rain anytime she wants to says, "That's a good idea." And she snaps her fingers 3 times or whatever, and it starts to rain. It rains for 40 days and 40 nights, which is a long time for it to rain, until not only is the valley full of water, but the entire earth is covered with water, and all the people are killed. Except for this one crazy guy who'd built a big boat in his backyard. And when people said, "Why are you building a big boat in your backyard?" he'd say, "Well, you never can tell when you might need a big boat." And, well, sure enough, the rain starts coming, and starts raining day number 1, day number 2, day number 3, day number 4. And that guy says, "You know what? That big boat just might come in handy." So he gets together his family and 2 of every kind of animal he can find, and they all load up on this big boat. Sure enough, the boat comes in handy. The floodwaters start to come up. The boat lifts right off the supports and goes floating off. So this guy and his family and all these crazy animals are floating around on this crazy boat for 1,250 days, which is a long time to be floating around on a big crazy boat with a bunch of animals. But this guy figures, well, the floodwaters came up, they got to go down sometime. So every day he would send out a dove. He'd open up a window on the boat and send out a dove, and the dove would go up and fly around in a big circle and then come back. But one day he opens up the window, checks out the dove, and the dove flies up and then it zooms over the horizon. And when it comes back, it's got a twig in its mouth, a green twig in its mouth, and the guy says, "Oh well, I guess there's some land over there." And so he steers the boat over and bumps into the top of a mountain. And as the floodwaters go down, well, as it turns out, not all the human beings are killed. They sure would have been if it hadn't been for that crazy guy and the big boat. It's a interesting story. A lot of parallels, a lot of connections, a lot of parallels to the Noah flood story, and I'm sure a few of you at least caught them. The Noah flood story, which is found in the book of Genesis, the first book in the Hebrew Bible, and we'll catch up to that book when we catch up to it. Even down to the number of days that it rains, the number of days they float around on the boat, the dove story. I mean, a lot of similarities, but a lot of differences too. And I think most significant, as far as we're concerned in this course right now, um, in the Noah flood story, there's a warning. Everybody knows for 3 years that there's a big flood coming. In the Gilgamesh flood story, there's no general warning. Actually, the crazy guy who builds the boat finds out that the flood is coming, so he builds this big boat. But he doesn't tell anybody about it. Nobody else knows about it. It all comes as a big surprise. And the gods just kill everybody without warning them, um, just to have a good night's sleep. Which strikes me as maybe a bit of a overreaction, a bit harsh maybe. Destroy the human race so that we can get a good night's sleep. A bit self-centered, just a bit. Um, and that's just mean. I mean, if your neighbor's stereo is so loud you can't get to sleep, you don't go kill them. And even if you did, you'd give them a good warning first, wouldn't you? You just don't go around killing people without giving a good warning. What kind of neighbors is that? What kind of manners is that? Of course, if you're going to kill your neighbor, you give him a good warning. You say, turn down that stereo or else I'm going to come kill you. I mean, that's just a neighborly, mannerly thing to do, okay? But just to wipe out the human race just to have a good night's sleep, sounds a bit harsh. And people listening to the story said, man, your guys really are mean. And well, even at times, the people that Gilgamesh talks to start to wonder why. Why are the Sumerian gods so mean? Well, Gilgamesh has an answer for that one, too.